In the years leading up to the era of merchant princes, businessmen settled and started their trades. These men and their kin would power Burlington's economy for decades to come. In 1788, Gid King Sr. moved to Burlington. 2 years later, King Jr. and his business partner, Job Boynton, built their first ships. That same year, Benjamin Boardman and shipwright Richard Wilcox built their first ships. This is the period when the first warehouses were being built on the waterfront. Over the next few years, into the early 1800s, Moses Catlin began his industrial work in the Winooski Falls. Another influential member, John Howard, started as a tavern owner that traded his life to one on a farm, which left him bored for a number of years before he sold the estate and bought a hotel. He would go on to be the owner of one of the most popular hotels in Burlington for the next 35 years. The stage was set for Burlington to be a major industrial and shipping center. Then, in 1807, the federal government put in place a trade embargo on Great Britain, including Canada. This was to maintain neutrality in the Napoleonic Wars, which had been the source of much distress to U.S. merchants. But it would have had the unfortunate side effect of freezing Burlington's growth, if anyone followed it. Merchant princes such as Moses Catlin were involved in both legal and illegal businesses. He turned profit on his lumber mill at the Falls and smuggled goods into Canada after the embargo of 1807. Trade on Lake Champlain was split between three major players: Admiral King, his ex-partner Boynton, and Benjamin Boardman. Shipwright Richard Wilcox played both sides. During the war, Vermont was split socially by the War of 1812, between Burlington, which was economically dependent on trade with Canada, and the Patriots and the rest of the state. During the War of 1812, Burlington suffered more from disease than battles. The influx of troops and poor sanitation caused a rampant pneumonia to claim over 300 lives. Between the years of 1807 to 1812, the value of goods going through St. John's more than tripled, and following the war, the King and Catlins took control of the market. Many new businesses were formed to support the garrison in Burlington during the War of 1812, and it was very good for the local economy, but Vermont's relative neutrality in the war led to conflicts between the soldiers and citizens. John Howard and others who owned taverns provided a vibrant spot for socializing, business, or leisure. Coffee shops were also popular spots. So at this point, we have the situation that trade on the lake is dominated by Gid King Jr., known as Admiral, and others. Business was booming for everyone. Then came the trade embargo of 1807. Rather than stifle growth, trade moved underground. Smuggling was big business, more legitimate than trade was before. In 1807, the trade embargo with Canada began. In 1808, in August, the most famous smuggling incident with the Black Snake left one bystander and 3 officers dead. 3 smugglers were convicted of murder, but only one was put to death in November of 1809. We'll dive into this more a little later. In 1810, shipping across the lake was simple for Catlin and King because they used a ship led by Ramon Manzuco. Manzuco flew the ship the Saucy Fox under the guise of a Spanish flag. He appeared neutral, so neither set of customs officers, American or Canadian, had any issues with the ship. However, hidden in the ship's past was the detail that it was actually built by Gid King in 1810. In 1812, the battery was purchased by the government for the war. John Howard also purchased Howard's Tavern. On August 2, 1813, 2 British ships shelled the battery and some naval vessels. The area was quickly evacuated of Sillington, and the British retreated under return fire. This was the only fighting Burlington received during the war. In 1814, 2/3 of the British Army was supplied by beef by American contractors, principally of Vermont and New York. In 1815, the battery garrison was so big that some troops had to be quartered in UVM buildings. The war ended. In 1823, the Champlain Canal opens trade to the Hudson in the south, and by 1826, Gid King Jr. dies. The Grassmount building was built in 1803 by John Johnson for Thaddeus Tuttle. John Johnson was a surveyor, carpenter, engineer, and architect. The battery is where the famous attack on Burlington took place during the War of 1812. As a fun fact, the Burlington PD are set up in the same spot that the garrison was about 200 years ago. Another famous location is the Winooski Mills. This is where Moses Catlin had his lumber mill. The Johnson House has some interesting historical significance. It was built in 1806 as part of a 22-acre farm for Moses Catlin, but was sold back to John Johnson, Vermont's first surveyor, in 1809. Johnson was an accomplished and prolific designer and engineer who saw the construction of numerous other buildings in and around Burlington. Many Vermont business owners were heavily involved with trade with British Canada as their main source of revenue. On August 3rd, a set of U.S. Customs officers went up the Onion River to go find the Black Snake. When officials went to go board the ship, the smugglers shouted threats and eventually began firing on the U.S. Customs officers. 3 of the smugglers were tried, but only one was put to death. Cyrus Dean was executed on November 11th, 1809, in front of 10,000 people to witness Vermont's first official execution.